Pause in the football discussion, and we appreciate all those chiming in from across the nation. As a matter of fact, across the continent on that. But we are going out on video chat right now. TSN's Darren Dreger joining us today. I can only imagine from the Big Smoke. Good morning, Dregs. Where we find you at today?
Hey, Rod. You know what? I'm in the home office. Actually, I'm in my kitchen this morning, not far from the home office. And I strayed from the home office because my Great Dane sleeps in my home office. And she can be a little loud and boisterous when I'm doing these things. So
learn from her dad.
Doing a little work around the house, doing a bit of radio and other things, preparing for next week's podcast. You know the drill. You do it every day.
I absolutely do. Thanks for joining us for Coffee, Dregs. I appreciate it on this day out here in Saskatchewan. And look, you've really been keeping the air miles up. You always do, but coming home again, you've been here a few times in the last few months, but the Heritage Classic seemed to have really met everybody's expectations from the NHL.
Well, I've been to a handful of these things, these outdoor games, and a couple of Heritage Classics. Well, more than that, a few. Winnipeg was excellent a couple of years ago. The original back in 2003, the Edmonton Oilers, the Montreal Canadiens. For me, that was the best just because it was the first, and it was blistering cold. It was like minus 20, 21 back then. And I remember the Players Association in Edmonton, having a pretty hard conversation with the National Hockey League about the reality of canceling the game. And it wasn't just because the conditions were so frigid. It had more to do with the conditions of the ice. It was so cold outside that the ice was so brittle that they were worried that there could be injuries on the ice, let alone frostbite. So that to me sticks out. But this one, for all aspects of the spirit of the event, moves to the top of the page. Mosaic Stadium, that was my first trip there. I mean, you guys know this. It is a world-class facility. And the problem that the National Hockey League is going to have moving forward, especially in Canada, is Regina is going to be a near impossible act to follow because of the stadium and because of the outpouring of support. So all of those things, and then the fact that the weather turned as we were hoping it would on Saturday. It wasn't blindly cold. It was like -5 at puck drop, and there was a light dusting of snow and all of that. It made for a wonderful experience. So kudos to the NHL, the Players Association, and for all the organizers in Regina, because it was a job well done.
Well, I hope that they come back. It was funny because obviously you're around Gary Bettman quite a bit. I've met him before, but not spent this much time with him. He's a funny guy. And he said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. And then he stopped and he's like, well, we may have another one, but it's the first in our lifetime, talking about Regina. So do you think there's any chance that the NHL would come back given the way that it went?
Yeah, I do. And largely because of Mosaic Stadium and the outpouring of support from not only Regina, but the province of Saskatchewan. I mean, literally, it's the perfect neutral site, right? Roughly halfway between Winnipeg and Calgary. So geographically, it makes terrific sense. So down the road, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, it would be reconsidered. I reported something in Insider Trading last night, and it's not breaking news. And I know you guys follow the Canadian Football League very closely. We know that there's been this ongoing interest in Halifax to potentially build a CFL-worthy stadium. And it seems of late, the politicians in Halifax seem to be winning over, and they don't think it's a great idea, and the project seems doubtful at this point. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, there's supposed to be a vote on that in December in Halifax. If they were to build that CFL-worthy football stadium, I all but guarantee the NHL would be quick in there, as quick as they could. And who can't envision, say, the Colorado Avalanche with Nathan McKinnon and the Pittsburgh Penguins with Sidney Crosby, assuming they get this thing done in a head-to-head clash in Halifax in a football stadium. So failing that in the next half dozen years, whatever it takes, then I think for sure they would circle back and look at Mosaic and Regina, just because it was, again, to reiterate, just a top-level experience for everyone involved.
Very cool. That would be exciting. Darren, as Rod was talking about the Oilers early on, disappointing, watching them again last night. But as they look for secondary scoring, I've heard Kyler Yamamoto's name come up. But then when it comes to young players in the AHL, Lane Pedersen, a guy who played in Swift Current, he's having a good start to the season. Who do you see as some young guys who might be ready to get their opportunity at the next level?
Well, you mentioned one of them for sure, and that is Kyler Yamamoto. The jury was somewhat out on him prior to the start of this season. For a smallish player, would he be able to handle the load at the NHL level? He certainly has a skill set that can be honed to play in the National Hockey League. I think he's quick enough, but he wasn't showing everything that they needed within that organization at the American Hockey League level to be absolutely certain going into this season. Well, he's matured both as a young man and as a pro hockey player. And, he's getting it done at the American Hockey League level. And I know that there's been some debate among the Edmonton media on Twitter about whether or not you rush this guy in. I don't think it's rushing him. I really don't. I think that he's had a couple or a few seasons now to prove that, he's at least potentially worthy of a good look at the National Hockey League level. So where's the harm in that? Give him a taste. There's no guarantee that he's going to stick, but that's part of development. And, in saying that, if it proves to be too much, that's fine. Send him back. But one thing I will tell you guys is Ken Holland, even when things were going terrifically well for the Oilers out of the gate of the regular season, I talked to him about, well, maybe this expedites the process just a little bit. Anyone who pays any attention to the Edmonton Oilers could see that the bottom six up front was likely going to be a bit of a problem, or they'd have to find some sort of offensive groove, and they haven't been able to do that. So would Ken Holland be encouraged because of their start to expedite the process, maybe deviate from the plan, maybe bring up a Yamamoto or someone else from the American League, or go hunting and use some of those stockpiled assets and better your bottom six, give you a little bit more offensive depth? And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. Unless there's a piece that falls in my lap, I'm probably not going to be doing any shopping until February. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Yamamoto or someone else from Bakersfield get called up, but that would have been part of the original plan.
The Leafs always in the headlines, tumultuous, for better or worse. But I found it interesting. After being asked a question, Alexander Ovechkin had some, I don't know if you want to put an advice or a comment on how this Leafs team looks. How did that land in Leaf Nation?
Well, Leaf Nation did not embrace the words of Alex Ovechkin. Some were offended by it. There were some former players who are now analysts who understood what Alex Ovechkin was saying. And even Mike Babcock, the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, took it to heart. He admitted that it hurt his feelings, but he's a realist, and he knows that Ovechkin speaks from what he knows. And, just look at the birth certificate here. Ovechkin is now in his 30s. Let's rewind the clock to when he was Austin Matthews or Mitch Marner's age at 21, 22, 23 years of age. He wasn't the same player then that he is now. He has some of the same traits, some of the same qualities. He was, still an edge of your seat type of performer, but he would take more individual risks as a younger player with the Washington Capitals because he was driven to be that guy to produce the offense. He had to learn that there's more to it. You have to find a way to adhere to the structure of the game. And, instead of taking that risk in the offensive zone, maybe be a little bit more patient, set things up, or caution towards the side of playing the defensive side of the game. The Maple Leafs aren't there yet. They're not there yet. They might get there. I see the Toronto Maple Leafs as being a Stanley Cup contender at some point in the near future, but I don't see it just yet. That's not to say that they can't find lightning in the bottle in the second half of the season. I don't think Ovechkin was being disrespectful at all, not even a little bit. I think that this was just a sheer recognition and acknowledgement of what he had to go through and what his Washington Capitals teammates had to go through to get to a point where they won the Stanley Cup.
Hey, lastly, Dregs, just a couple quick ones for you. I'm watching Bab's comments this morning on the highlights, and I'll tell you what, like you, he's from here and immensely popular here. People are pulling for him personally, but I'll tell you, he looks like he's aged. Like, how is he doing with the pressure of coaching that team? Well,
we'll never know, Rod. You know that because you know Babs. He he doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve. He can be very direct, both with the media and with his players and with everyone, associated with the Toronto Maple Leafs organization. But he is never going to show a weakness. What he does when he goes home, I mean, that's up to him. That's his private time. How he decompresses, aside from taking a daily run and working out and all of those things, we can't be sure. But he's feeling it. There's no question he's feeling it. And he acknowledged that prior to the start of the season. Babs has been around the world of hockey a long, long time, and he has had a terrific level of success at every level that he has coached. But he is a realist, and he knew coming into this season that it wasn't good enough to qualify for the playoffs. It wasn't good enough to try to kind of limp out of the first round. He knows, and it doesn't matter to him that his job is on the line because he knows it's on the line. He was brought in to deliver results, and thus far that hasn't been the case. Now they needed the time to develop to get to a point where they're not only playoff contending, but they have to be Stanley Cup contending. And anything short of that, frankly, if they go out in the first round, I doubt he comes back next year. If they go out in the second round, I think it's fair to question whether or not he comes back. And there's two reasons to that. One is every coach in the league has a shelf life. And two, you've got Sheldon Keefe, who's had a high level of success coaching the Toronto Marlies. Sheldon Keefe is a wanted man by other teams around the National Hockey League, and I doubt that Kyle Dubas just lets him sit in the American Hockey League or go to another organization. So there could be tough decisions ahead, but Babcock would appreciate and understand why.
Great answer. And the only last one is our viewers are chiming in as you're on here live, asking us to ask you if you could ever see the NHL having a team in Saskatchewan. That was going to be the talk coming out of the weekend.
Yeah. Well, look, you're pulling at my heartstrings. Do I think that corporately or the fan base could support an NHL team? I do to some degree because, look, hockey fans in Saskatchewan are as good as any in the world, period. And we saw that with 33,500 strong at Mosaic Stadium on the weekend. Now, I get it. It's a spectacle. It's a special event. But I think that, you see, how fans will travel to Winnipeg or they'll travel to Edmonton, they'll travel to Calgary to get a fix of NHL hockey. What I would worry about right now in the moment and in the economy of the Prairies, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's in a tough place. It's in a tough place. And based on the difference between the U.S. dollar compared to the Canadian dollar, is there enough corporate support to sustain that? And you guys might have an answer that supports that possibility. I'm not so sure. I'd be a little bit skeptical just given the finances that I know are now involved in, buying an NHL franchise, relocating an NHL franchise, or like Seattle, seeing an expansion team happen. You're talking upwards of $1 billion US. That's a chunk of change.
And Dregs, my take, if you care, is it's not going to happen. Let's stop talking about it because we're getting our hopes up, and it's just going to break our heart. So, Darren, thanks.
I tend to agree.
Yeah. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for all you do for us, and keep on trucking, buddy. Thank you.
All right. I look forward to the next one.
You're watching Rod Pedersen On Demand. For more of The Rod Pedersen Show, visit rodpedersen.com or follow Rod Pedersen on social media.